The president said more Republicans need to be elected this November. Longtime conservative columnist George F. Will argued the opposite this weekend. He wrote, many Republicans, including House Speaker Paul Ryan, have, quote, become the president's poodles. Poodles. The Congressional Republican caucuses must be substantially reduced. He continued, so substantially that their remnants, reduced to minorities, will be stripped of the Constitution's Article I powers that they have been to invertebrate to use against the current welder of Article II powers. That's the president. They will then have leisure time to wonder why they worked so hard to achieve membership in a legislature whose unexercised muscles have atrophied because of people like them. What an indictment. Nevertheless, the latest Gallup poll shows that 9 of 10 Republicans approve of Donald Trump's job as president. Joining me right now is the author of that tough calm, George F. Will. You know, Steve Schmidt, the man who ran the campaign for John McCain, has offered a similar, if not so literate, endorsement of voting Democrat this year by a Republican. Are you saying now, here on television, that people who vote this November should vote for Democrats?
I'm saying that the Republican Party is now so homogenous, so thoroughly the Trump Party, particularly after the episodes such as his intervention in the South Carolina primary against an incumbent congressman of his own party, Mark Sanford, in which he successfully got him thrown out because of insufficient obeisance to Trump. That for that reason, if you now vote for Republican candidates, you are voting essentially to, you can't pretend there's pluralism. You're voting to affirm this man in his leadership of the party. And I believe it's important for the future, such as it might be, of the Republican Party, that they pay a terrible price for what they're doing.
Are people that you know, like Senator McConnell, are they waiting him out?
Sure. Senator McConnell says, look, I have a job to do, and I can exercise my Article I powers in collaboration with his exercise of the Article II powers to change the nature of the Article III institutions in the country, the federal courts. Senator McConnell rightly says often, we in the Senate are in the personnel business. It is our job in the powers of advice and consent to shape the federal government. And he proceeds to do that, knowing that the president is not his choice.
Well, you know, it's not like a new pharaoh came to Egypt, a new pharaoh, because the fact of the matter is they have Article I powers over the president. Why doesn't McConnell challenge the president? Why don't the Republican Party challenge him? If he's this Bonapartist or this Cromwellian figure that's just come in for 4 or 8 years, or maybe just 4, why don't they take him on?
An excellent question.
The Democrats took on Jimmy Carter. I can tell you, I was there. They were quite willing under Kennedy and others to just challenge the president they didn't agree with.
What finally precipitated the column we're talking about was the Senate's unwillingness to even vote on an amendment by Senator Corker of Tennessee, who of course is leaving, an amendment with which 100% of Republicans, I'm sure in private, agree. That is, he said we should say that, stipulate that any tariffs imposed in the name of national security have to be voted on by the Senate.
Well, I think Toomey agrees with that. Anyway, today's Utah primary is tonight. Former presidential candidate Mitt Romney's trying to win the Republican nomination for senator out there. Romney was one of President Trump's strongest Republican antagonists during the 2016 campaign. Let's watch all that.
There's plenty of evidence that Mr. Trump is a con man, a fake. He's playing the members of the American public for suckers. He gets a free ride to the White House, and all we get is a lousy hat.
Mitt is a failed candidate. He failed. He failed horribly. That was a race that absolutely should have been won, and I don't know what happened to him.
He creates scapegoats of Muslims and Mexican immigrants. He calls for the use of torture. This is the very brand of anger that has led other nations into the abyss.
And he walks like a penguin onto the stage. You ever seen? Like a penguin.
Of course, Romney pulled back on his rhetoric when he was being considered by Trump for Secretary of State. Here's what he said recently when asked whether he would continue to call out the president if he wins that Senate seat in Utah. Let's watch.
I believe I've made it pretty clear that I'll stand with President Trump if the policies he's proposing are good for the state of Utah, for other states, for the nation. On the other hand, if he were to say something that is divisive and significant, something which were racist or anti-woman or anti-immigrant, then I feel a moral responsibility to speak out.
Should we count on that man, Mitt Romney, to stand up against Trump on moral issues?
Depends on which Romney shows up, whether it's the Romney of that blistering speech of which you just showed an excerpt, or the Romney who I think was being toyed with by the president when he thought he was being considered for Secretary of State.
He took him out for frog legs. And he did. He made a fool out of him, and he bowed down to get the frog legs to get to be Secretary of State. And Trump then did, as you suggested, on purpose humiliated him.
Mitt Romney is a gentleman, a man of exquisitely good manners, and exquisitely good manners will avail you nothing in a knife fight. You know, he says whenever Mr. Trump says something divisive, racist, or offensive, he's going to speak out. He's going to be speaking out a lot, but I wouldn't count on that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.